Hello? I still have a headache, so this will be a little shorter. One of those bits where I ramble on without much of a plan and don't read anything. Or much of anything, at least. So today I went and saw a play titled The Cripple of Inishmaan by Martin McDougall. It's an Irish play that was being shown in a local theater. And I suppose I tend to have more complicated feelings about plays like these, because I am not much a fan of tragedy. And the play, although containing some bittersweetness at the end, is definitely what I would call a sort of tragedy. And I tend to have trouble with these. I didn't really know what it was about or anything. When I watch them, especially with plays like this, or halfway through, I realize, oh, this does not end well, right? Because for me, plays, books, comics, movies, I want them to either teach me something or inspire me in some way. Because in daily life, there is enough tragedy. In the news I hear, in the stories, in my own memories, for example, there's enough sadness and despair and lies and hurt and events not turning out well, people carrying wounds that they don't talk about or which they recall from years past and haven't quite gotten over, issues that you think you've challenged, and then they pop up again and again and again. You know, folk who appear one thing and then turn out to be something else. It's just somewhat depressing to read stories where it ends badly, to read stories which tell me about the despair of man, which tell me that an area or people are not nice. And there is some quality to a play like this where it delves into the real humanity and shows somewhat more likely relations between people, especially on a small island like Inishmaan, which is an Irish island, where the people you make friends with, the people you engage with, are who is available, not necessarily who you like. It's the same in school, for example, or at family reunions, right? You may not have someone that you would be friends with if you had all possible people in the world to choose from, but they're fine enough for here and now. We as human beings tend to socially match. We have a range of acceptableness. It's clear that if we as a person narrow our sense of who we get along with well, narrow our sense of who we want to be friends with to a small enough point, then you can really pick out, the people you get along with. But two things. One, that could very well end up being such a narrow scope of people that you do not find one. And two, it is like a spike or an electron scanning microscope, right? It goes to a point, but it's not a hook. It doesn't tie you to people. And the poem, without spoiling too much, involves lies and deceit, involves folk who really do feel for each other. Also being afraid to tell the truth, or understanding issues about another person without contemplating the true strength and reality of who they are, for good or ill. Their strengths and flaws, for example. We don't really know what someone's strengths and flaws are until we've seen them in action, until we've seen them in situations. And a conundrum begins to present itself. As human beings in social situations, dealing with manners of tact, dealing with appropriateness, dealing with the fact that we're stuck together and we have to get along, we put on masks. We hide ourselves. We bend our straight spirit into a hook so that the quality of us remains the same. We're steel or gold or bronze folk, but the shape is a little more complex. Are we trying to fit a lock? Are we trying to thread a needle? Are we attempting to bind our strings into the warp and weft of the local community? You can stare at cows all day long, you can read books, you can be called names, and stand alone. Be strong and straight, but also lonely. You can be crooked and mean and have some oddity to you. You throw eggs, or you have a strange nickname. And if people know who you are and what you are explaining this constantly through your actions, through your looks. Do you dress up or down all the time? Do you greet people, politely or roughly? Are you slow to warm up, or is everyone your instant new friend? Do you hold to the level of politeness of a certain society? You can see this with someone who comes from another culture, right? Sometimes you're talking with each other and the conversation skips a beat, right? Like you feel that some communication wasn't reached. And do you stop and say, okay, I think we missed something? Or do you hold back and go, okay, let me think about this for a second and try to understand what just happened? Do you try to explain things correctly and honestly? And that can be so much trouble sometimes, right? In this play, Billy wants to tell his aunts something. He says, I want to go where I feel I have to do this. But instead of doing so and marching through their objections, standing up in the clear and proclaiming his intentions, he lies to someone. He sneaks off. He doesn't write any letters. These sort of events that go on for months and happen in days and minutes. I recognize my own self in them. I recognize so many actions I've undertaken where I say something and, like, what was the name? Johnny Patine can't come out and ask the question. I can't come out and tell everything. Instead, you make up a story which expresses your true intentions. You stand there and engage someone in a conversation, hoping that they'll receive some lesson about what you really mean, but you can't come on and say it. And then sometimes the person you can say it with, you have your own rituals, your own methods of honest communication through a series of manners which may be effective for the life and style you have, but we can become trapped in that as well. We can become so used to the way we talk to our parents or our brothers or our friends that saying we've changed or saying that we want to change and trying to express that is difficult. Not least because we often don't know exactly what it is we want to change. We have a feeling of discontent. We have a feeling of wrongness. And like the main character in this play, we often think that going away is the answer. That heading somewhere else, traveling the world, will reveal to us who we are and what we can do. It will open up new opportunities where we aren't so constrained by the qualities of a place, of a life. We can say, this is my home, but the home does not fit me anymore. Or this is my home, and I don't know how to grow beyond my home, beyond my place, my job. So you go away. You travel the world, and some people are happy by this. They gain themselves a sense of confidence. But there's another way that things can turn out, too. That everywhere you go, there you are. You travel to America or Ireland or Japan or Korea or Armenia or North Macedonia or Mexico or Finland, and you end up acting the same there as you did here. It turns out the issue wasn't the situation you found yourself in, it was you that made the situation. Still, at least we, by traveling, attempt to change. At least we know that we have been these places and seen these views. Even if we fail to achieve much of what we wanted, even if we don't change that much because we already were honestly who we were, it was just that life was twisted into a hook that grabbed on to the place we existed in. But the metal was the same. We were bronze or iron or diamonds. It's hard to have a sure feeling about a play like this because it's about people and complications. I recognize myself in bits and pieces here. I recognize ideas I've had, and sometimes I understand what's going on. Some people were talking afterwards about how the folk in the play insulted each other and how this is a cultural thing. It's a term of endearment. We were talking with someone, and at one point I had to. They were like, "Oh, this is in Scotland. I've done this, and I saw this," and I was like, "Well, I remember seeing a Scottish TV show online where these two blokes would go into a pub and as part of the show, and they'd insult the barman. They'd trade insults back and forth, and it's a term of endearment. And I've seen this, of course, in American male culture with your friends. They swing insults at each other or type them in a chat box. And it's meant to show how close you are. It's a term of messaging that indicates, oh, these people feel close enough to me that I can insult them. You know, if I can insult you and you don't grow mad, then I must be joking. And if I can joke with you, then I must be comfortable with you. And if I'm comfortable with you, then we must be friends. But, well, I can tend to have this sort of relation with my brothers. You know, we grow up and you have these old histories and insults whereby you communicate. I don't really have that relationship with my friends. I suppose because I found myself in a relationship with my brothers, but I chose to be in a relationship with my friends, at least the friends I still have. So what does that say about me and what I feel comfortable doing? A play like this, if you slow down, makes you think about yourself because you recognize yourself in these folk and you start to think, is that me? Am I stuck on an island? Am I following a pattern? Am I throwing eggs because it's an appropriate way to express myself? Because it's the sort of gentle insult which you can use as a manner of speech without bypassing social norms. Or if you do bypass social norms, you do it in such a way as to simply carve out a little space for yourself because, oh, that's this person or that's that person. They just act that way. They have that quality to them. And if you want to get along, you have to accept that quality. But what, of course, can happen is that the person takes on a one-dimensional frame. You see them through one eye, or with one eye. It's difficult to know how they are, how complex they are, whether they tell the truth. Johnny Teen, for example, is probably one of the more unique characters. And as you recognize these people, you also recognize why they've turned out the way they have. The space in which they've grown and tried to expand. You think, what have I done myself? How have I bent myself into shape for the situation I'm in? Well, one of these ways is to travel and see if you unbend. And if you do, then all the better. A different person, a different life. You have it. If you don't unbend all that much, then it becomes a mite more complicated to ponder. Right? If you're not happy at home, so you travel and you're not happy there and you're not happy here, and you come back home and you've unbent a little, you've changed a little, you've been places, you've seen things, experienced them, and so for me at least, you try to fit into your life, into a society or a community, and that works for a while. But what did not fit before when you were unbent does not fit now when you are unbent. When you know who you are and what you want. And You can recognize through years certain styles of your existence. I do this, I do that, I'm slow to warm up, I am suspicious, I don't like conflict, I tend to keep my thoughts to myself, I have headaches, go lie down. In my off time, this is what I do to relax, and I'll play certain games over and over again. I'll read certain books over and over again. Uh, I will try to change myself to move. I'll buy a new game. I'll buy a instrument. I'll read a different book, and I'll speak about it just to myself, trying to change, but some things you don't. So what do you do with that when you are, Billy? You leave and you come back and you're the same person. For Billy, it's really a journey to his 1 in a million chance, right? That's really what it's about. But then tragedy strikes, and you go, "That's not the story I want to hear." I sure as hell don't want to hear 1 in a million chance, and then it ends like that. I'm like, great, happiness before the end, and there's a bitter sweetness to it, but it is still a tragedy. And I tend to get a little depressed. I tend to sit in my room and meander my thoughts through an ashen realm of abandoned memories, occasionally going outside, twirling around in the sunlight, eating some fresh fruit, painting, reciting poems, but you find yourself in your room again. It's like going to work. You work and you work and you work, and you finish the project, you finish the day, you help the customer or the guest, you get the promotion, you take a vacation, and you go back. You go back and you go back. And that's really what I found most difficult about having a job, was that you go back and what have you changed? You're in the same position. I suppose I'm not very good at sustained effort. Even if I show up every day and talk, it's what, for an hour, 2, 3. I read a book, but then there's a book I've been trying to read for like 4 days that is emotionally troublesome. So I have to focus myself. Focus. Come on, get up to it. I write down a poem, and at the end of the month, I'll go to work on it, on a new book and a new idea, and see what I can make out of it. But I don't work 8 hours a day traveling back and forth, because right now I don't have to in order to survive. And so I stare at cows. I talk to rocks myself, read books. Sometimes you wonder if you're crippled in some way. You wonder if there's something wrong with you. But then if you know yourself, who you are and what you are, at least to a certain extent, the metal you're made of, how you tend to act, what you want, what you don't want. One of those is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to tell what you don't want than what you do want. Then I think it becomes a little bit more of fitting the world to you instead of fitting yourself to the world. What can I do? What are the powers and abilities that are mine, that I can exercise, which make me an individual? Billy is crippled in the show, in the play. But what does he gain by this? Not much. You can also tell he's a little different than the people around him. I suppose it's the love story that I always like, because it promises, or at least suggests the promise of happiness for a while. And so I'll focus on that, and I'll read books with romance in them, because even when it's a bad relationship, there's moments of spark. The worst sort of relationships to read about, right, are the ones that have gone on for years and years, and yet the people still aren't comfortable with each other. Why is that? It's because they've curled themselves into hooks to join themselves together. Well, if you don't do that, if you're straight and clear about who you are and what you do, how do you join yourself together? You can't do it by hooks. You can't do it by main force and pulling. You have to warp and weave. You have to entwine the string. But then at the end, you can have, and I've seen this quite often, two narrow needles heading in the same direction, never touching, never really acknowledging the other person is there, but they always are somehow. And there's a beautiful pattern that's been made through life in this matter. You look behind and you can understand how parents or grandparents or, the friends you see have made something beautiful in the past, and the future remains open still. So that's why I don't really like the ending. I want a future that has hope, because I recognize too much of myself in a few of the characters, and why do I need to be told again how terrible life is, how mean people are, how twisted they can become? The secret beast-like features or secret angers that reveal how badly someone has been injured invisibly. I know all this, and it just reminds me to be afraid and worried. It makes you want to stare at cows instead of going to school. At least the cows are exactly what they say they are. I suppose that's, for me, Helen is probably the most interesting character in the show, and perhaps, the mean girl is my version of I can fix him. But I wonder why that is in my head. It's because I'm like, there. Do I assume that the mean person is more honest? Do I assume the mean person is hiding themselves and you can fix them? Do I assume that the mean person, for all their faults, at least has a quality of toughness or strength or will? Because, well, Johnny Patine may be the most interesting person. You only learn about his heroic qualities after the fact. Too late. You don't I mean, you trust him to be himself, but he himself doesn't seem that great. Yet he must have hidden qualities you are unaware of. Who would he have been someplace differently? Who would he have been if he wasn't stuck on an island, you know, tied to news making for his bread, bound by history and culture to a specific way of life? Babby Bobby in the play, I wasn't quite sure what that meant. Apparently, Babby is a vernacular way of saying baby. So, baby Bobby. This says in one means that, he's been called, this is his nickname, this is what he's called, and he doesn't mind, he says. So, when you first hear it, you think, oh, it's a term of endearment. It's just, he's been called that for 30 years. That's just his name. There must have been a young Bobby and an old Bobby, a barman Bobby, a sheep herder's Bobby at some point. But maybe not. Maybe baby Bobby, he's called, because he's still that sort of baby that lashes out when hurt, without really talking or understanding. He hasn't hidden what he is. It's just that Billy thinks he's something he ain't quite. This is the way it goes with kittens and puppies. They test boundaries. They're so cute, but they also have claws, and they don't always know how to use these claws in which way. They don't always know how to communicate certain ideas. I don't have much experience with human babies, so I can really only speak about, kittens and puppies. Little kids, nieces and nephews, for example, who are quite selfish creatures when young. They can also be selfless. They can give away toys, which means much to them. They can sacrifice. They can work. It's just that they haven't had time to really grow a depth to them. They're simpler characters until they grow that history, and they rely upon the warp and weave of time to, forge the needle and bend or unbend. Everyone goes through that bending, that socialization. You're made to fit into a key, made to follow manners. And some people resist so much that they end up bouncing back like bamboo and smacking society in the face. But is there another way? Can you remain yourself unbent, bound to the world, the warp and weft of life, pressured and pushed and pulled every which way by every which person, for every which reason, and yet somehow or on occasion clear the waves, fly in the sky and go into the third dimension of the warp and weave and look down on all of it, reflecting in the shiny needle all the lights and the patterns. They affect you, they inform you, but they don't have to change you. Because the pressure of light is so much less than action. The pressure of knowledge is so much less than action. Except, of course, that knowledge, that light, which makes you react to yourself. when you see a character or hear a story and go, oh, that's me, or that's a part of me, or that's someone I could have been. Right? It's a tragedy, though, to return to the beginning and, I'm already convinced my life is a tragedy. And like all tragedies, it is a tragedy of my own making. The tragedy of my own faults. And so what if Billy's story had turned out differently? What if he hadn't had that final turn of fate, that ironic turn of fate? That's what I would want to hear. That's what I would prefer, because that's what I hope for myself, right? That things turn out better, that by leaving and returning and daring and changing, we change our fate. But it doesn't always happen that way. And so what do you do if you're a character in a play like this? What do you do if you're in a tragedy? What do you do if you're on a small island and you leave, you come back, you're still the same? Everything is still much the same. At some point, Babby Bobby is released. You patch up your differences, or at least you know who each other is now. You go about your life, and do you change because of some small event in the past that, rolling on in your life, takes on more and more importance? Or do you go back to staring at cows? Go back to reading books instead of writing them? This is the worry of my own life. That you can be so tired and stuck that you don't know how to get out, and when you try to get out, it turns out the problem was you all along. So how do you fix that? How do you bend or unbend yourself? How do you tie your own needle and your own metal? You have to change metal if you can't change the shape. You have to recognize the flaws and greatnesses and possibilities within you and work with those powers that you have. Not what you want, but what you are.